Hey there.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
You should be able to see both myself and Sir Ian McCartney.
I can indeed.
Excellent. Can we call Sir Ian McCartney, please?
Good afternoon, Sir Ian. Can you see and hear me clearly?
Yes, I can, thank you.
Thank you. I'm one of the ushers and I'm going to take you through the affirmation.
Okay.
If you'd like to repeat after me, I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
sincerely and truly
declare and affirm
declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
the evidence that I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Can you give your full name, please?
My name is Ian McCartney.
Thank you very much, Sir Ian, for attending today. You should have in front of you your witness statement.
Yes.
And it's dated the 27th of September of this year. Is that correct?
Yes, and my signature.
Is on page 33.
Yes.
Is that correct? And is that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you very much.
Before you go any further, Sakura, I just point out to the left of me is my friend and neighbour, Mr. Adrian Blundell, who signed a confidentiality undertaking for yourselves. And he's here solely to pass me any materials or deal with issues around my health profile if required.
Absolutely. And he has no personal involvement in any matters relating to the Horizon project.
No, none whatsoever.
Thank you very much.
Oh, that's fine, Sir Ian. That's fine.
Thank you. Thank you, Sherman.
Thank you. So your witness statement is WITN 033700100. That statement will go into evidence and the questions that I'll ask you today will be supplementary to that.
Okay.
But I will begin just with a brief background. You've set out your professional background in quite a lot of detail in your witness statement. For the purpose of your appearance today, the most relevant is that you were Minister in the DTI with responsibility for postal affairs following the May 1997 election. Is that right?
That is correct.
And that was until 2001 when you moved to the DWP as Pensions Minister.
No.
No?
No. 1999, where I moved to the Cabinet Office, and such was my duties as the Minister. He decided to then send me to the Department of Works and Pensions.
And then in 2003, you...
Ironical. But
In 2003, you, I think, rejoined the Cabinet Office as a Minister without portfolio. Is that correct?
that's right. Yes.
And then in 2006, you were appointed as Minister for Trade and Foreign Affairs. And you left government when Gordon Brown became Prime Minister, and you retired from Parliament in 2010.
That's correct.
Thank you very much. I'm going to begin by asking you about the information that you were provided with when you became a minister. You've described in your statement, it's paragraph 26 of your witness statement, that you were briefed about the Horizon project when you began, albeit you were briefed on a number of other things at the time as well. Were you aware that Pathway was the least preferred bidder from a technical perspective during the procurement phase?
No, indeed, we knew nothing about the procurement phase and decision making as it had been done by the previous Conservative administration. I do not make a point here, a party political point, but it was a situation where a number of us ministers asked if we could see the documentation to try and ensure, rather than assure ourselves, but just to precisely what the agreement was and the reasons behind the arrangements and what was set out there for disputes and the resolvement of disputes. And I wasn't interested in the partisan political discussions that may have been in some documents. That's no problem. But the fact that we weren't allowed to see as an issue, I think it's still not resolved by governments today, and it's something it should, because it also harms any inquiry like this one, who I'm sure would have liked to have had access to the documents as well as ourselves at the time.
We have seen quite a lot of those procurement documents.
Right.
We've also looked at the rules, for example, through the Directory of Civil Service Guidance from around the time. It seems as though the rules do allow for sharing of information for continuity of policy reasons. Were you aware of that at the time?
No. No.
Did you
No.
ask for the specific documents, or did you ask for information relating to the
No,
procurement process?
asked for access to the decision-making process. And I think ministers at the DSS and certainly my Secretary of State, and I'm assuming our colleague at the time at the Treasury.
And do you recall who you asked for that information?
No, the Secretariat, to be honest with you, it wasn't, I didn't go to the Permanent Secretary or anything like that. It would be through my personal assistants in the office, and I left that to them to provide me with an answer.
Thank you. So that would be your ministerial private office?
Yes, indeed.
Yes, thank you. At paragraph 37 of your witness statement, you have said that ICL and Fujitsu were a huge multinational company with technical expertise, and you would have thought that when ICL were originally appointed, this was on the basis that the persons who appointed them also had that same expectation. Was that something you ever discussed, that the fact that they were a large corporation or something along those lines? Were you ever...
No, but the situation was that there was a few companies in the marketplace who were large and significant players in what was a growing global industry seeking out contracts with governments on these types of issues. And my expectation was that only companies with technical abilities and knowledge, and in some instances, obviously, the skills, not in some instances, in all instances, the skills. And as we went into this review and decisions to see whether we could save it, continue it, or release it and start again, it became obvious to me that both in the public sector and in the private sector, there was a real shortage of technical expertise. And indeed, in the private sector, I would say there was a dodge being played, that when they sat down with governments, they would bring in their group of highly skilled professionals to outline their proposals. But subsequent to that, it was more junior ranking and less qualified people that were then put in place to take on the contract if it was offered to them.
Thank you very much. We may go into that in more detail when we look at your reports that you authored. The procurement process began in 1994. ICL Pathway was selected in 1996. When you arrived in your office in 1997, what did you understand, if anything, about technical concerns relating to Horizon?
I knew nothing, but that doesn't mean that anything was kept away from me, in the sense that we'd just become a government, and it was normal practice. The first thing after saying hello to everybody was to get these red binders. In my case, there must have been about 20 of them, which rather shocked me at how many there were. And one of them was the post office, or it might even have been two from the post office, first and second class delivery. And my task then was to very quickly acquaint myself with the issues and the documentation from the civil service, but also I came into office with a list of already priorities already in the public domain, which included employment relations, the social chapter, not go into that, and issues around the creation of a low pay commission and the creation of a national minimum wage.
Thank you very much. You've described a tug of war between the Department for Trade and Industry and the Department for Social Security when you entered government. We've heard about that quite a lot already, but can you briefly give us your take on that tug of war?
Yes, I was shaken from my naivety that government across Whitehall all worked together hand in hand and in the same order of marching bands would do. But very quickly I realised this project had been established, and it wasn't the first, and I doubt if it had been the last project, where two departments with competing interests were brought together, and those interests were legitimate, by the way, from the point of view of the then Department of Social Security and the Benefit Agency, and from the Department of Trade and Industry in relation to the Post Office Counters Limited. But because of this from the outset, and no central structure in place across government to determine the priorities for the programme, I'm assuming this because I haven't seen their papers, but no programme was available that set out who would be a customer, who would be the provider, and who in all of this would be responsible to ensure the project was indeed agreed fully, that it was transparent, the responsibilities in the project, that there was a process in place, again transparent, to deal with issues, as there always is in IT, issues around complexity, quality of the work being done, and thirdly, a timetable to ensure that the work and the financial situation were closely monitored on a regular basis. And what I found was from the outset was that the ministers in both departments, that includes myself and others, were being basically put in a position of, here's the historical situation from our area of interest, and here's the other interest area. And then the other minister, if you spoke to them, they would give to me their interest in the area and their expectations, and also if the expectations weren't met, what their intentions would be. And that's where it was obvious this was a very difficult situation with probably a breach in people wishing to trust each other, certainly a lack of trust completely in ICL, and a legacy of, to the point of the mistrust had got so complex itself, that was added onto the complexity of the programme, the policy, and that made it an absolute quagmire in terms of finding potentially a way forward out of it.
You said a lack of trust in ICL. Was that by ICL? Which one? Sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
No, a lack of trust in ICL by the players involved, their customer base. It should have been at the outset a contract, this is my view, a contract with Post Office Counters Limited, and that BA was the customer, and the customer required to be satisfied from the outset that what was being constructed would meet their requirements as a business going forward. But it was also true at the time with the changes taking place in IT, it had a huge potential impact on the world's post offices, but in our respect, into the post office here, who, as well as having financial obligations, there was political obligations put on them by successive governments, including my own, to have a social input in terms of the structure of the company, the services they provided, and across the board in the three companies that were the Royal Mail.
Thank you very much. You've mentioned the Department for Trade and Industry and the DSS. We know that the Treasury also became involved. We heard quite a lot of that yesterday, but again, can you give us your take on the Treasury's involvement and the impact that it had?
Yeah, clearly the Treasury had responsibilities for the PFI programme, which covered the previous government and, of course, the incoming government also had decided to utilise PFI in a whole range of areas. Easiest ones are types like construction, refurbishment. That time, IT was of a different magnitude in my view. It was significantly more complex. It was an evolving, I know it was a science, but an evolving way of doing business. And with that, the complexities of doing business in a way that you were almost making the funding up as you went along. And so the Treasury indeed had a huge interest. And of course, they had technical expertise in Montague, who I think also, my first recollection of, I think he's a sir now, isn't he? It's Adrian, isn't it? Sir
Yes.
Adrian. Was, and I may be wrong, but I apologise if I am. I think he was known to us when he came into office because of his work on the project in the Channel Tunnel with him and another colleague who subsequently came with us, Mr. Corbett. And so he had a significant knowledge and skill in relation to these subjects. But even in IT, I'd imagine it would stretch him as well.
Absolutely, and we'll come to his report shortly. Can we start, though, with your report, which was later on? When was your report? I don't actually think it has a date on it.
No, it was in 1999 after I moved. And so it was between 1999 and 2000 it was published.
Thank you very much. Can we look at it? It's WITN 03370101.
And could you, from that perspective, yeah.
Yes. If you'd like to look at your hard copy, it's B1, tab B1.
B1, okay.
And I'm going to look at page 12. Before I get to that, what was the purpose behind this report?
Right. It's one of those occasions where you get moved in government, reshuffled, and you get reshuffled and there's little nuggets of potential activities which aren't on the front of the tin or printed on the tin of the job. And this was one of them. And it became particularly clear to me that there was an opportunity here to learn significantly from my experience on Horizon. What became clear in talking to officials in the Cabinet Office and the fact that the government were contemplating the establishment or having the establishment of an IT czar, that there was room here for significant work to be done, and that the situation was particularly bad across all parts of government, and indeed in terms of the skills or lack of skills across government dealing with these companies, some of whom are taking us to the cleaners.
Is it fair to say that Horizon is cited throughout this report as essentially an example of what to avoid in many
Yeah,
respects.
yeah, there's Horizon, and some of the report has been anonymised in the sense that to get cooperation from both public and private sectors, we engaged a range of different organisations with different types of IT projects, and the skill mixes you'll see on the membership of the group of us who looked into this matter was extensive. And what we found was that across the piece there were substantial issues of a fundamental nature, not just the structures of government, the structures in terms of the way in which procurement took place, the lack of structure and the lack of skilled personnel to plan and then to implement. And there were also, across the piece, huge gaps in the management of complex, and sometimes not so complex, but become complex because of mistakes, of IT projects, both in the public and the private sector.
Let's go to page 12 if we can. And if we could look at the bottom half of the page, there is a section that's highlighted there as an example of evidence. And it says there, a major project involving a number of public sector organisations did not establish a single consolidated business case until late into development. Although benefits had been identified, they had not been validated against a joint agreement of the total change envisaged. When problems arose, therefore, their impact on the projected benefits could not be tracked against the original change planned, and those benefits were quickly eroded. That, I think, is an example of Horizon that you're citing there.
Yes, yes. I can't remember if it's specifically Horizon, but it certainly fits the Horizon's MO in terms of the project going forward.
Thank you. You don't need to turn to it, but on its page, electronic page 133 or internal page 106, it refers to number 8, joint venture between the Benefits Agency and Post Office Counters Limited. And in this particular example, it has a footnote 8, so perhaps that is that example.
Mm. Yeah. Do you want me to look at it?
No, not at all. I mean, can you tell us how this particular problem that's identified there manifested itself in relation to Horizon?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Absolutely. So you've highlighted a problem there in that box on page 12. And how did this display itself in the Horizon project?
Right, I'm trying to...
Please do feel free to spend a moment having a look at that particular
and that's
example.
In my report.
It's page 12.
Yeah, thank you.
And if you look below 1.14, there is a box.
Yes, that's right. I apologise.
That's absolutely fine.
Yes. This here would fit very snugly the shoes of the project we're undertaking to talk about. The problems that envisaged would encapsulate here is that the joint agreement of the total change envisaged never was, in fact, a compatible vision, in the sense that the visions that the partners had, the business partners had, from the prospect of Benefit Agency and POCO, were entirely different. POCO wanted to be able to maintain a paper-based system to a position that they could realise at a later date a technological fix to ensure that going forward they could enter the IT age with a a business which was fit for purpose.
And that, sorry.
Yeah.
The lack of a single consolidated business case that's referred to there, whose responsibility, in your view, was that?
Well, that should have been at the outset when procurement, at the point of procurement, there should have been an agreed management programme and a senior reporting officer. In a case like this, a very senior person identified and agreed to draw up that programme we're talking about. And this didn't happen. And so you ended up with, on the sidelines, the Treasury increasingly having to pay bills. Then you've got the Benefit Agency stroke DSS, the DTI stroke Post Office or POCO. And of course, on the other side, you've got the company itself. They saw a huge advantage in creating a structure which could be sold on to other businesses worldwide. And if they could get it to the position they wanted it to, it would be very beneficial to them going forward as a business.
Thank you very much. Can we turn to page 15, please? And this is another example in respect of something that went wrong. It's in the section 2, which is entitled Leadership and Responsibility. And if we look at that example halfway down the page there, there's an page 15.
Right, okay, I'm going backwards here.
That's absolutely fine. Please do take your time. We have plenty of time this afternoon.
Right, page 15.
Yes, if on the screen we could scroll down, thank you very much. It's the first example under evidence there. I'll read that for the record. It says, a very large project central to the business of a number of public sector organisations and justified on the basis of a shared business case did not establish single ownership of the business case and project until 2 years after contract signing. By this time, much of the original value of the business case had been eroded. The lack of a single point with overall responsibility for the project caused difficulties from the beginning, as the different organisations had varying degrees of commitment to the project objectives. This became more apparent as the project progressed and the benefits eroded. Conflict management, prioritisation and resolution processes were also adversely affected. Again, insofar as you're able to, can you expand upon that in relation to the Horizon project? Because the footnote there, footnote 11, again, refers back to the Horizon project.
Yes. Again, this is evidence that would fit the bill in terms of Horizon. You got an agreement 2 years late, but it's not an agreement in the way in which the rest of that paragraph suggests, in that once they had an agreement, it was only to have the project done. There was no shared business case in reality in terms of at the end of this programme, what will be achieved, what was our goals, what will be achieved, is it workable, and when will it work, and the cost of it, and whether the financial cost will be able to be scaled to a point where the project will be financially viable. And of course, so you got BA signing up to get to ACT very quickly. POCO signs up to not to get to ACT very quickly, but provide a platform for them to be able to at least dabble in the IT services area. And of course, the organisation themselves, who had a long-term strategy for the development of ICL and Fujitsu into a company of international importance for the business going forward, and being able to provide a product or products which were seemed to be products that would work in circumstances like the post office and other organisations like the Post Office with a significantly large footfall in market of consumers.
Thank you very much. One of the things that the Chair will have to consider in due course is recommendations for the future. As somebody who wrote this report, who did you have in mind as acting as the single point of contact with overall responsibility in a project like Horizon?
Well, there would have to have been an ERO. It's so important that there is a person of knowledge, skills, workplace skills, skills in relation to understanding the project management and identifying the targets that are required to be done and how the project's managed and run.
Is that somebody in government, outside government?
It should be a senior responsible officer who can be in government. I would have said at this time when this was published, you'd be very hard pushed to find MD in government of that seniority and skill to take on a task like this. And that's not a criticism of the people who got landed some of this work. It's an expanding area of expertise and knowledge, which was not part of the public sector going forward, looking at workplace development, workplace training and education, nothing in terms of labour market knowledge of to be able to recruit and retain and pay responsibly the type of people that were needed. And therefore, there were most of the skill and knowledge lay in the private sector making bids. But that didn't mean that the private sector was also covered. There's a huge underpinning of the skill base required for this emerging part of the world economy, never mind ours. And I'm still sure today we've not got on top of that, but maybe somebody else who's more knowledgeable than I am now at this point can disagree with that. But it seems to me that it was a huge accident waiting to happen.
One final example is on page 44. And if I could take you to the bottom of page 44.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll read that out. It says, when examined during the course of this study, 4 central government projects involving 3 departments were shown to have solutions being developed that would not deliver the business benefits anticipated at the outset. In each case, had the suppliers' plans been examined and measured against the required business benefits at stages throughout the procurement life cycle, the emergence of a significant gap would have been exposed. So is that saying that there needs to be greater examination and measurement throughout the project?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt, you're absolutely right in that comment. But it's a bit more than that. It only works throughout if you know what, before you start, what is your programme of work and what will be your choices you make in respect of being able to ensure that suppliers' plans are robust, are transparent and clearly capable of carrying out the contract that you're signed up and given to them. And that was not always the case. Because of a lack of skills, again, you took, not for granted, but you took on trust what they were saying. And this goes back to an earlier point of myself. They put their A team up and then give the public sector their B or sometimes their C team to carry the project out. And that's when you get purely exposed and the gap between what you expect in outcome at the outset and what's delivered isn't at all like what you expected.
We will probably come to it in due course, but just pausing there then, is that what you experienced with the Horizon system?
Well, that's part of the experience, yes. Without doubt.
That refers to a few different examples.
But it was also not just due to this type of evidence. It was also still due to the fact that the departments involved in Horizon had different end games envisaged. And you could say that ICL was left to weave a way through the middle of the two of them.
So did you feel that you were being given the B or C team by ICL, or was the problem more about ICL having to navigate the different departments, or both?
I think it's part of both. And I don't want to be unfair to ICL in respect to the skills. These people were in place when I arrived anyway into post. But the reality of the delay, and when they started the initial discussions about how do we get out of this delay, by the time some of this would come forward, it would have been nearly 10 years and still not a computer on a post office counter anywhere. And so it seemed to indicate to me that at the very highest levels of the project, the people senior on the project themselves either had failed completely in carrying out instructions, or more importantly, they would probably have argued, or they would argue, that much of the job became overcomplicated because the government departments hadn't done sufficient work themselves in relation to their own solutions. And every time a mistake or a difference of opinion came up on something, it was further cost, further time restraints, to another solution was found to go and help develop the programme. I don't know if that's helpful or too long-winded.
Thank you very much. In that example there, you've referred to, I think there were a few different examples. One of them is Horizon. Another was the National Insurance Recording System, or NIRS2. I don't know, you haven't been asked about this in your witness statement. I don't know if you remember it, but...
Well, I'll tell you how I remember it. It's not because of the shambles. It was when I became a Minister for Pensions in the DWP with Alistair Darling. It just shows how the roundabout goes round. And I started getting letters and complaints from the public. And it was only then when I asked, what's all this about and why the delays? And it was then they told me about the falling over of the system. When I think when it was switched on, it fell over. And it was a number of years. In fact, they were still, I think, at it when I left the department in 2003. We're still working on getting back the material that was lost. We're trying to find it. And as a consequence of that, it's taken years and years, and God knows the cost, to get the system online and working effectively, and all the material records and stuff that should be on it were on it.
I mean, we heard from Lord Darling. He had raised NIRS2 in a letter warning about what not to do in terms of rushing things out without proper testing. Is that something that you remember at all?
A proper testing of NIRS?
Yes.
Yeah. I can't remember the letter, but I'm not surprised. And to be fair to Alistair Darling, he would have spoke to me about it. We work very closely. And so I apologise, but I I've got no recollection of the letter, its contents.
No, not so much the letter, but were you aware during your involvement in Horizon of concerns from, for example, Lord Darling, about previous IT projects that had suffered problems because of a lack of adequate testing?
No, absolutely not.
I'm going to move on to the running of the post office. And can we look at your witness statement? It's WITN 033700100. Thank you very much. Can we look at paragraph 21? That's page 8.
Okay.
Thank you. It's on screen if you'd like it to see it on screen.
Thanks, yes, on you go.
And I'll also read you the passage. It says, "From my perspective, as the Minister with responsibility for the Post Office, my role was to represent the points of view and problems faced by sub-postmasters and POCL. The latter was a public body that, in my view, could and should have been doing better. A business of its size and complexity should have a more detailed forward plan about how to modernise and bring into the business technology which was already in existence in one form or another in post offices around the world." Can you expand upon that, please, and tell us why you reached that conclusion about the post office?
In general terms, in answering that, I very quickly had concerns about the whole breadth of Royal Mail, including, of course, POCL. All three businesses faced significantly large issues in terms of market, in terms of technology, skills, and a lack of opportunity to expand their markets in a way that they hadn't been allowed to over a long period of time. For example, I'll come to POCL in a minute. For example, the Royal Mail and its industrial relations problems had led to a situation of a lot of progress in terms of the introduction of new technological equipment to improve their operation and the delivery of the posts that they receive. The problem with their delivery distribution group, there were some when they came to power in '97 in the Treasury who wanted an immediate privatisation of this section of the Post Office because it lacked capital investment and was underperforming in a growing market in terms of logistics. I wanted the company to consider seriously becoming not just a postal distribution parcel company, parcel force I'm talking about. I wanted it to become a logistical company, which wasn't taking a van load up to Scotland with parcels and coming back empty. It really needed to be better run and provide with capital investment the appropriate vehicles and stuff, and could have been a big competitor, in my view, across the whole distribution market and not just parcels. And of course, POCL is the third area, and this was an area which I don't think they took a sense of where the wind was blowing when IT, and I don't blame them, that this is true of both public and private sectors all over the place, that how quickly IT would become so important to not just the retention of the business, but more importantly, how to expand it and be able to have a business which looked after the needs of citizens who are going to be increasingly engaging in IT purchasing and through that being able to, from the post office point of view, being able to ensure that even if they were going to use banking services, they should take advantage of the then and continuing even today. I noticed banks closing huge numbers of branches, and the only availability of services previously in rural and some urban areas would be a post office with an IT technology delivering for the banks where they'd withdrawn their services.
Sticking specifically with Post Office Counters Limited, what was your view of their leadership?
I would say maybe unambitious. And I don't want to be unfair. I mean, I find these people were hard-working and want to do the best by people. But I mean, the leadership of it also stems from the board and the boards that preceded them. And so there also lies because of this, because of governments prior to us coming in and subsequent, the post office was sat upon and used as a cash cow by the Treasury over 20 years or more, I think, where when they were making profits, a lot of that was just profits which were taken by the Treasury and recirculated, but none of it recirculated back to the post office for investing in the future. And so being seen as a cash cow, suddenly because of what's happening in new technology, it's no longer a cash cow. It's got to be having cash given to it in huge amounts over a long period of time. And so I do think this affected the management and their attitude that even if they brought forward new ideas, it would depend on a political decision by government ministers.
Was it in some way easier for them to sit on the cash cow than spend time developing new IT projects?
I've got no evidence in the sense of a paper I could show you, but I think there was a great deal of disincentive. If you thought about it for a moment, if your business, you're working through a huge customer base, and at the end of each year, in the main, not every year, but in the main, significant sums of profit are made. And that profit then, before you can even discuss it, has to be transferred out to the Treasury. You have to say to yourself, well, what benefit I don't mean me personally, them personally, the business that they're working for and the business that they support. I found that people who worked in the post office were very loyal to the post office at every level. I found that. And so the disincentive wasn't out of caring. If there's a disincentive, I think it was out of the way in which central government dealt with the post office over a long period of time.
Sir Adrian Montagu's evidence was that the post office had failed to develop a comprehensive and effective approach towards managing the project. Would you agree with that, or would you disagree, or would you say something slightly different?
No, that is a fair summarisation from the Treasury spokesperson.
I'm going to move on to the subject of technical viability and reliability. I think you've heard the evidence given by Mr. Sibic in relation to the Montague report. Is that?
Can I say I was so pleased to see how well it was and how sharp he still was. A great deal of not a soft spot, not that kind of person, but I really appreciated his work when I was a minister.
By the sound of it, you had a lot of faith in the information that he gave you, that it was reliable.
Yeah, not only in terms of its honesty, but also the transparency of why he was given the advice to me in the first place, and his capacity to take very difficult issues, which he had dealt with for many years, if I put that way, relationships with the Post Office and the Treasury, and was able to take me through it and probably made me a better minister in dealing with it.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the Montague report because we've seen it and we know what it says, but I'll just take you to the executive summary. It's poll 000280094.
That's D what?
And if we can look at page 3, please, that's where the executive summary is.
Right. Right, okay.
Now, I perhaps don't even need to ask you about anything that's written there, because if you've heard the evidence of Mr. Sibic, I want to pose a similar question to you, which is, was your understanding that this report was saying that Horizon was robust and reliable, or that it was a viable or feasible system or something else?
Yes. It's what you mean by robust, I think, is key here. I think it was robust in the sense that at the point he looked at it, there was either in place or going to in place means of having a business structure and plan to carry out the project in a different way, but bring a project to fruition from where it was. And that was what he recommended. If you said, was it robust in terms of signing it off and setting a date to start the services in post offices, I wouldn't say that at all. No way we were anywhere near that.
And if we look at the second bullet point under findings, it says our view is that the programme is technically viable. There must be some risk around scalability and robustness because the system has had to be tested at the level of component parts, etc. And there are sections in this report that identify problems that are identified. I mean, was your understanding at the time that you received this report that it was signing off Horizon as robust?
I'd have to, in the sense of answering that, give you a general view. You could interpret it that way, but from my own point of view, with all the documents that are coming across my desk on this and discussions I've had and from various relationships involved in the project, I wouldn't have enough information or proof, as it were, enough history to say that all the component parts tested, all fitted together, and it could be well managed through the system. And I think the papers that you follow on over the months proved that to be the case. In terms of, I don't mean support my theory. I don't mean that at all. I mean, I think it proved the case just how much work had to be carried out following this report, and indeed how close it came to collapsing.
Thank you very much. I get the sense that you followed quite a lot of the evidence of Mr. Sibic and others, and that I don't need to take you to those subsequent reports and matters such as that. I'll very briefly take you just to a November 1998 document. So it's Bays 0000103. I think it's your D2, if that helps. But I'm only going to look at it very briefly because this is shortly after. So the Montague report was July 1998. I'm going to look at page 15 of this November 1998 document, and it's paragraph 6 on page 15.
Have I got the right document to be?
D2, sorry, D.
D2.
Yes.
Right. the document I've got in D2 is BA Pockle Automation.
Absolutely,
Progress
yes.
report. Yeah.
That's a progress report, and it has your name in the top right-hand corner on the first page, or your private secretary / your name.
And that's page 6.
Yes, page 15, internal page 14, but it's our page 15. And the detail of this report doesn't really matter, and I'm just going to read you a very short passage.
Apologies, we're going to, on the D2, on page 15, mine is comments on funding proposal. And it's got,
It's the page before that.
the page before that
Yes.
hasn't got,
It should have something that says acceptance there, number 6.
yes,
Yes,
apologies, right now.
I'll very briefly just read that one paragraph there. It says, ICL Pathways' proposal on acceptance would mean that the contracting authorities would be locked into the system before it had been fully tried and tested. BA and POCL have already made a very significant concession on acceptance as part of the Corbett proposal, i.e. in waiving their termination rights at acceptance of NR2, which does not deliver the full contracted requirements. Both parties are not willing to bring forward acceptance before the end of the live trial. Both parties are prepared to consider a modest increase in the number of allowable faults, but not in the magnitude being proposed by ICL. Do you recall, in the winter of 1998, movement away from trials with regards to ICL's negotiating position, that they wanted to have less testing of the system, effectively?
Yes, indeed. And it was one of the issues that the group I established via the Secretary of State, Stephen Byers, of the staff unions, the postmasters, and other key people. Because one of the things that I wanted us to do was to be able to monitor effectively the trials and the quality of the trials. And despite the need for us to get to a point of where we established as soon as we can the program in terms of rollout, it shouldn't be rolled out at the expense of quality and transparency of the trials.
Yes, absolutely. We'll get to the working group shortly, but just sticking it in the winter of 1998, I'm going to take you to a document that you will, again, already have seen. It's BAYS 00000418. This is a month after that update that we just saw, and this is the letter from Peter Mandelson to Stephen Byers. Now, at this time, December 1998, we've heard quite a lot of evidence of a real divide within the government departments about the future of the project. And the picture that is painted in this letter is quite stark from the Secretary of State for Trade and Industry. If we look at the lower down the page, please, the final paragraph, Lord Mandelson saw two options, continuation, or, in the words that he's used on that second bullet point, or we can take a major step into the unknown, delaying modernisation of the post office counters network, risking the departure of existing clients and virtually eliminating the possibility of attracting new ones. And it's in this letter, having painted the stark picture, that if we go over the page, he uses the following words. He says, there is still some way to go to complete the Horizon project, but the basic development work has been thoroughly evaluated by independent experts who have pronounced it viable, robust, and of a design which should accommodate future technological developments. Did you understand at that stage that the Horizon was robust, or was that putting a gloss on how things were, or something else?
No, I don't think that would, despite his reputation, I don't think that's what Peter Mandelson was doing. He had, when he became the Secretary of State, from my knowledge, he was very hands-on with this, with me, and engaged with us, and he had a really strong view of e-government and the developments of government departments and businesses. And so he did have a knowledge of it. He may well, of course, had been given further briefings, which he would have told me about. And so I think this would be his honest view of the information that he'd had. This may have been because they'd worked hard over the previous weeks. You'll see in other papers where the situation looks hopeless, and once heads were knocked together, they made quick progress on matters between them. So this may well be one of those which he's now happy with.
If that was a reference to the Montague report, would it be correct?
Well, I don't know how I can comment in the sense that is it the exact same information as he got from that Montague got, or is it a subsequent look at the situation and evaluating it? I noticed independent experts. I'm assuming that. I'm not sure if that's CA or.
Sorry, we've just had a fire alarm.
Ladies and gentlemen,
We may need to break.
may I have your attention, please? Due to circumstances beyond our control,
So perhaps this is a good time to take our mid-afternoon break.
Yeah, that seems fine to me, Mr. Blake.
We're probably
Let's
meant
have
to be
a
rushing
break
about
in
a
any
lot more.
event for 10 minutes, and if it's going to be any longer, you let me know.
Thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. We're back. It turns out there wasn't a fire. Thank you. So, Ian, we were just looking at a document before the break from Peter Mandelson, where it states that independent experts have pronounced it as viable, robust, and of a design which should accommodate future technological developments. We're interested in knowing where the term robust comes from, or if it's used in the same way by government as it was later by others. Was that term used, to your recollection, within your department as shorthand for the state of Horizon?
Yes, I think that would be a fair point to make. That's why I said in a previous answer that the interpretation of robust, I didn't say it in this way, but robust it's quite a stretchable phrase. And in that respect, I'm absolutely sure you've now got a robust from the then Secretary of State, a robust from the Treasury spokesperson, and as a consequence of that, we're in a situation where I suspect that we're now going to try and move on to see if, with the situation as explained by both of them, that we could try and take things forward to proceed with the project. And that I would imagine in ministers at the DTI, which includes myself, were probably very concerned that the package could still be withdrawn, that the programme would be withdrawn, and the consequences for that would be very difficult indeed. Indeed, I would say very robust in negative terms.
So in this period, is there a degree of trying to sell Horizon to the rest of government on behalf of the Department for Trade and Industry?
I would say that there was obviously advocacy involved, and their advocacy is involved because of the commitments in the manifesto and other things about the future of the post office and the post office's network that POCO were responsible for. And in that situation, I found it very difficult indeed for the government, indeed not only difficult, in many areas impossible, having given that commitment quite fully and openly committed ourselves to the network, that unless we had going forward a business plan and a technological plan, then that commitment could never have survived. The closure programme would have intensified. Customer base would be eroded extremely quickly, in my view. And the consequences for that, for the post office counters and the government's veracity on its claim in its manifesto would be, well, it would be knocked out completely.
So would it be fair to say that by then, by December 1998, as far as the Department for Trade and Industry were concerned, abandonment was out of the question?
Yeah, there was, I would say abandonment was out of the question, but it was a bit like, it's like, I mean, I felt like a poker player. I got showed three hands and none of them would win a game. And so you had to then pick what was the best one, what best chance did you have in getting across what we wanted to do in the end, and find a way of doing it to ensure that we did get a new technological platform going forward for the post office, that the benefit agency got what they were committed to during the election, an electronic safe system for delivery of benefits, and the savings from that be able to be regenerated. And I would imagine we were at the time saying anti-poverty measures. And so there was, I think, a necessity to not to forget those commitments.
Can we look at CBO 001000001_072, please?
What's that?
You don't need to turn to that. It'll be brought on screen, and it's a document that we won't go in to any detail in, but it's one that you will probably have seen through other witnesses. It's a note from Jeff Mulgan to the Prime Minister, and it's page 4, paragraph 8, where the message to the Prime Minister is, and it's the last few words of that paragraph, that I'll read that paragraph. It says, at first glance, most of the factors point towards continuation. However, my view, which Lord Faulkner shares, is that although short-term considerations and expedience point strongly towards making a deal, this will in the long run prove unsatisfactory, leaving the post office and government dependent on a hugely expensive, inflexible, inappropriate and possibly unreliable system. And then over the page, we have the handwriting of the Prime Minister at the bottom, and again there's a reference there to the system itself being flawed. And my question for you, arising from that document, is simply that we don't see those kinds of concerns about reliability being displayed in documents coming out of the Department for Trade and Industry at that time. Is that something that you agree with?
No, can we just go back? Jeff Mulgan has written that, and to my knowledge at the time he was writing it, and he's a very good advisor, or was, never spoke to any of us. I mean, that's a personal opinion that he has personally expressed, and he's done it in a ways. He's picked out items from various sources and put together an argument for the Prime Minister. I mean, that's not unusual from a special advisor to put an argument in that way. The interesting thing, although the Prime Minister's note, the Prime Minister didn't waver for the need to continue the project. The Prime Minister was secure in the view that the project had to be found a way of working. and even put forward, I think at some point, suggestions on how to do that. So interesting as it was, Jeff Mulgan's, and I would just say it's a note in history, and I think the project has lasted longer than he did.
But do you not think that at the same time the Department for Trade and Industry were doing a similar thing in not highlighting flaws with the system?
No, I mean, I can only say, as a minister, I given the information I knew, that I would be nothing other than transparent and honest, even if it upset people, or even if it was so transparency made it more difficult for me to put a case. I saw no benefit whatsoever, given that I was arguing for a transparent system from the beginning, not to be transparent. Alongside of that, I had a duty, and this is transparent as well, to put across the consequences, because in the end I'm not an official, I'm a politician, and my political brief given to me by the Prime Minister was to ensure we implemented what we'd said about the post office. The fact that I knew nothing about ICL until I came to government, that just happens. That's, for a politician, another day in the office to sort out that the situation's different to what you first envisaged. But I had a duty of care to the government in that sense, but it's not a duty of care to mislead or misrepresent. It's a transparent responsibility that I would be carrying out.
Absolutely. If we put allegations of misleading totally to one side, I think the suggestion might be that the Department for Trade and Industry weren't looking to where they should have been in terms of the technical robustness of the system. They weren't carrying out those kinds of investigations because they were so headstrong that they wanted the system. Is that something that you would agree with?
I'll take you back to it, and the McCartney report, I highlighted it in spades. And to be fair to Mr. Civic yesterday, he made the point. He wasn't technically engaged or trained to do this. His training and skills were at a different level, and the level that his skills were, for me as a minister, was extremely helpful, very helpful and sensible and pragmatic. But the point is that DTI, POCO, BA, DSS didn't have the sufficient number of technical experts. Indeed, if they had any at DTI, I'd like to know who they were.
Absolutely. And I could take you to some more ministerial submissions, but perhaps I don't need to, because there are submissions throughout December and later in the year that are pleading the case for Horizon, but that aren't dwelling on technical matters. And is it your evidence that that's because they simply didn't have the technical expertise to look into those kinds of things?
That's partly true, yes. But remember, they've got the political pressure of a white paper coming down the track. You've got unions asking, and quite rightly postmasters, about the situation. And when are we going to somebody come up with a proposal that looks like it's going to be doable and be effective in the objectives that were set right at the outset for this project. And therefore you will see, and in some places you may see in the paperwork, I got the impression of it being not a melee as such, but a huge amount of activity on the political front of people putting their points, but the points are put in a way that leaves a door open for some other kind of discussion. And in the end, reading the documents, I must admit, I was getting confused at some time as to which option we were looking at. We were getting options flying around the room with option A or option B 0. option 2, option 3. Then out the blue, another option comes up, A2, with Lord Faulkner's name on it. I never actually ever seen that one, so I don't know what it said. And just reading the documents, it does look like a maelstrom of activity where people in favour of the project were putting as much effort they could into it, intellectually and politically, to try and establish something, with the time clock going closer and closer towards a collapse in the project.
And would it be fair to say that the Department for Trade and Industry wanted to shut the door on further discussion so that they could get on with the project?
No, that would never have happened under the Secretary of State that we had, and I wouldn't advise that. And you will see in the documentation the importance that we laid on getting agreements, and we would help facilitate those agreements. And those agreements were quite complex. So you get the POCO and their arrangements with ICL. Then you've got BA and POCO, and then BA and ICL. And this kind of pyramid sometimes felt it was sitting upside down. It wasn't something that was other than shaky at best, and so it was important that whatever in the end we came up with, it was doable. It was transparently so. I know I keep using this word transparent, but it's so important in public life. And the finances were available on an agreed basis to take the project forward, and the design work, the engineering work, the strategic work around building the project to the ability to go live was critically important that all that was agreed, and that there was a signed agreement in the end. And I think it was a date in April sometime. I think it was critical because Fujitsu's board were meeting in April. I only say April, I think it was around about either my birthday, the 25th, or my granddaughter's, the 23rd.
Well, we'll get to April shortly.
I'm not saying that so I can get a card off you, by the way. So it's about, that was the kind of time scale that we're potentially having to work to.
Sticking with the winter of 1998, and I will move on from this period shortly, as you've fairly described, there were lots of discussions at a political level. I've mentioned before, in November, discussions about testing. I'm going to look at a document from December, the 14th of December, that also talks about testing. That's Bayes 0000400, please. It's a letter from yourself to Stephen Byers. If you want the hard copy, it's D98. But again, I don't think you necessarily need to turn to it in hard copy because it's one paragraph that you may have seen from others with evidence. It's a letter from yourself, as I say, to Stephen Byers. And if we go over the page, there is there a discussion about, it's a dispute that has taken place with Alistair Darling, and it's about acceptance testing. And it says there, third, acceptance testing. Alistair states that ICL persist in asking for acceptance on the basis of a laboratory test of the system as opposed to a live trial. We agree with him that it's a hugely important point. It would be unthinkable to sign off acceptance of the system until it has been shown convincingly to work on a reasonable scale in a live environment. But Alistair is, we believe, mistaken. ICL are asking no such thing. The company have moved substantially from their 9th of December position, and we have now conceded that acceptance will follow live trials based on the NR2 software release at 300 offices. More specifically, there are 24 separate components of the acceptance test procedure. Some do indeed involve elements of bench and or model office testing, but all also include live trial in 300 offices. When Lord Darling gave his evidence, he expressed some concern, said he had concern at the time about the size of those trials, only in 300 offices, when it was going to have such significant, such a significant project throughout the country when it was finally rolled out. Do you recall those discussions about testing at that stage?
Not in detail, no, but having said that, when I established the panel that I'd set up, the point I made both in writing and in person was I would like to see us as a group press for large-scale live trials. That I think is the word I use, large, a large scale. And this was the group that was established by me with the appropriate representatives of the unions, postmistresses, and other key people.
Absolutely. We will get to that very shortly. But just in terms of testing, do you remember a continued theme throughout this period and onwards was ICL not wanting to carry out further model office testing that the Department for Social Security wanted at that stage? Do you remember that discussion at all?
No, but I wouldn't be surprised because there are quite a few occasions through the whole saga you had to really push ICL to do what's been requested by its customer.
Can we look at...
This goes back, if you don't mind saying so, it goes back to our early discussion about the lack of senior responsible officer and a development programme and a programme alongside of that in terms of implementation. And if we had that in place, it shouldn't have required to get letters from Alistair or from me interpreting information from the front line from people who may have an interest in the front line as to its outcome. And so that's not an excuse, it's an absolute fact. This just shows you the difficulties when you've not got in place the recommendations that are in the McCartney report. So I'm trying to make it a bestseller.
Well, absolutely. So you have the lack of a single point of contact, and I think you've also expressed concerns about a lack of expertise on the civil service side. And perhaps we can go to your witness statement. That's WITN 033700100. And start at page 12, paragraph 29. So this is talking about 1998, and you say, at the time, technical knowledge and understanding of computer systems in government was extremely poor. Few people had the knowledge and understanding of procuring and developing systems such as Horizon, and so the civil servants managing the project did not always have the appropriate level of understanding to identify or raise issues. If I could look at another paragraph, it's paragraph 69, page 29. Page 30 over the page, paragraph 72. At the time, so it's at the bottom of page 30. It says, at the time, promotions within the civil service were based on years of service. So you had people who didn't know how to turn on a computer on leading on IT issues, and we were getting taken to the cleaners in negotiations with software companies.
Yeah.
Now, at this stage, you had the Montague report addressing technical viability, as we've discussed, a very early stage snapshot. You have ICL moving or trying to move away from certain types of testing. Am I right in saying that at this stage, so late 1998 into 1999, there was no further significant government commissioned analysis of the technical viability of Horizon?
That would be my understanding. That was the case, but that doesn't mean that was actually in practice. I just don't remember anything like that coming across my desk.
The in-principle agreement was not until the 24th of May 1999. Would it be fair to say that, to the best of your recollection, there wasn't a significant independent or otherwise report into the technical reliability and robustness of Horizon?
Yeah, that could have, in my view, looking back, as I do in terms of lessons learned, that should have been a report alongside of the other report, giving absolute clarity of what has been done to secure the objectives in the way you describe. And that would have been signed off, or should have signed off by a senior reporting officer. And again, that's another sign of the lack of the structure in terms of management control.
And I'm coming now to the thing that I think you're very keen to talk about, which is the Horizon Working Group of 1999. Am I right in saying that you saw that as a forum to raise those kinds of technical issues?
Yes, if people knew of them. The point for me was that during all the discussions that I've been involved in as a minister, and meetings with other ministers and colleagues, the one element which I thought was inadequate, and that was the engagement of people where the technology would impact on in terms of their business, or in terms as an employee, in terms of being a manager. It was always discussions with people at the top, and I wanted to be, and I've got a view of life, still have, that people's lived experience is as important as the so-called professional experience that people are claiming. And if I wanted the group set up and suggested the group to the Secretary of State and others, that this group would be a door opening for people with skill, knowledge and commitment who, from their practical experience, knew what was required on the ground, knew what they wanted on the ground, and had the capacity to understand whether or not the systems in place would be robust or not, or that the systems being put in place would be sufficient to ensure the business on the ground was able to continue and flourish at a later date in terms of the development of other products. And the other reason, with the unions and the CWU for many years had issues along the lines of it, the introduction of technology, which I alluded to in a previous answer. And it was therefore important to me that their experiences, negative or otherwise, that it was important that they felt part of being engaged in making decisions about this very, very big, difficult, complex and in trouble policy.
Can we look at Bayes 0000345, please? That's your D53 if you need a hard copy. But again, I don't think we're certainly not going to go into detail in this document. It's a submission to you from David Sibic of the 7th of June 1999, and it addresses the initial meeting, the first meeting of the Horizon Working Group. It's a steering brief. And if we scroll down, we can see those who attended. Now, bearing in mind the time here, it's 7th of June 1999. detailed agreement between Post Office Counters Limited and ICL wasn't reached until the 28th of July of 1999. So it seems as though the Horizon Working Group was working in parallel with discussions in respect of the detailed agreement between the parties. Was that intentional?
Yes. I think it was, certainly from my perspective. If I could have got agreement, I would have had the Horizon Working Group in place before when we did do. But the timing of it was down to the politics of it. I don't mean partisan politics. I mean down to the politics of where each of the main players were positioned in the discussions that were taking place. And so the balanced view in the end came to, let's get the group up and running now. We're now getting to potentially the end game, whatever that end game is. And so that's why we met. This was the first meeting.
And we see there the attendees included the Managing Director of Post Office Counters Limited and Mr. Dave Miller from Post Office Counters Limited, the CWU, the Communication Managers Association and the NFSP.
Yeah. I think the Communication Managers Union is now part of Unite the Union.
And what did you envisage that the three different associations there would bring to the table in respect of their various roles and responsibilities?
Okay. Well, the Communication Workers Union were involved in the mechanisation of the Royal Mail's collection delivery services, and they had been over the years some difficult discussions between management and the company and the unions. Obviously, I was never involved in those, but I knew of them because of my knowledge of the General Secretary, Derek, and others before him. And therefore, it was important to ensure that they felt they could give, from their perspective, a view of how IT should be able to be introduced and how it should work in terms of those engaged in making sure it works. Then the Managers Association, which I said is now part Unite the Union, these are the managers on the floor working with the CWU members, and as management, of course, their duty is to put across the view of the company itself on issues, as well as expressing their own issues about it. And therefore, it was important that that level of management expertise and knowledge got reflected in what was happening for the end game. And then the sub-postmasters, I mean, that was critically important. I mean, it's not just the fact that they had 20,000 outlets. It was the most of them, the years of their experience and knowledge of their customer base, the operation of their facility, whether it was a single post office or, like most of them, you know, a shop which included the post office, and their knowledge in terms of what would be required for them to be able to sustain their business. Secondly, in retiring, as many people were doing, some, of course, obviously, because they want work technology, fair enough, but lots of them were getting to the age where retirement was a great option for them. And as a consequence of that, procedures were in place in terms of payments to sub-postmasters who were leaving. And it was important, therefore, to them that the business, when it went for sale, was viable. It was feasible, because if it didn't, it'd just be collapsing. And nobody would buy it. It would be impossible for it to be bought. And so it was critically important that, and also, of course, they've sunk, as I understand it, I remember, approximately £1 billion of their own money in, over the years in the business itself. And that shouldn't be sniffed at, given that £500 million had already been spent and covered, and no equipment had been put in the post offices. And so I think that was one of the important reasons why they got involved.
Now,
I always found that the General Secretary, like any other General Secretary, puts the case for their members and advocates for them. I always found him a man who gave me it from the front line and didn't mix his metaphors, and in a way in which I could fully understand what was happening on the front line as far as postmasters were concerned.
so there you're talking about Mr. Baker.
Oh yes, sir.
Yes. In respect of the three of those organisations, was there one in particular that stood out with regards to what you imagine they would be able to help you with when it came to the technical side of Horizon, or were they equal?
No, and that wasn't a matter of being equal. They all gave what they could to the discussions, and they were coming from sometimes potentially different expertise, i.e. sub-postmasters didn't work in the big sorting offices that CWU members did. CWU members didn't run sub-post offices, but that was in the rural areas in particular a base for postmen and postwomen to deliver. And of course, the Communication Managers Association, it is now Unite the Union, their task was to implement and ensure the smooth running of technology changes in the post office. And therefore they had knowledge in terms of not only what happened technically, but when actually equipment was put in place, what was the response to it in terms of staff skill, knowledge, willingness, etc. And so they also had a story to tell.
Can we look at Bayes 0000345, please? That's your D53.
D50.
Sorry, that's the same document, isn't it? If we could go now to Bayes 0000346, and that's your D54.
54.
This includes the proposed terms of reference for that group. And can we look at page 2 at the bottom, please?
Mm-hmm.
You may have heard these being read to Mr. Baker this morning, but I'll read them out again just
no,
in case.
didn't.
Oh, okay. So it says there, I see the work of the group as falling into three main areas. First, there are the negotiations between POCL and ICL and between POCL and BA that need to take place over the next few weeks to put in place the detailed contractual arrangements that will give effect to the outline agreement reached on the 24th of May. So that's, as I said, they had reached the outline agreement and were still negotiating the detailed agreement. I see a role for the working group in carefully monitoring these negotiations and in addressing and helping to resolve any sticking points that may be encountered. Over the page, please. Thank you. The second area covers the remaining development of phases of Horizon, including large-scale live trials, system acceptance and rollout of the system smoothly and in a timely fashion to all offices within the network following the migration from paper-based methods of payment to ACT-based payments accessible at post offices. I believe that the working group could provide a valuable forum for bringing pressure to bear where needed and for seeking solutions to any problems that may arise. Just pausing on that second one, can you give us an example of what you had in mind when you said seeking solutions to any problems that may arise?
Yes, well, as you will note, in the whole of this group of events, when you think you're getting a smooth run at things, suddenly something out of your left side arrives, and it's a showstopper. And as we know, that had been happening on a regular basis, and we're still now at a point when this was going on, issues to be resolved, and some of those issues still related to the final look of the project in terms of options, and it was important that they brought some pressure to bear from their experience and knowledge, in particular the sub-postmasters, to being able to express their views and what they would see as a way forward to any of the problems that arise. And also that put pressure on me, and rightly so, to ensure that they were aware of what are problems that have arisen and are being informed about.
It says the third area concerns the commercial exploitation of the very considerable potential which the Horizon platform will offer once in place. The combined experience of the working group should prove a valuable source of ideas and contacts for business opportunities and future revenue streams. So focusing on the second area, really, you've said in your witness statement, I thought it was important that sub-postmasters via the NFSP and trade unions via the CWU and Communications Managers Association were engaged and involved in the working group so that they could explain what was actually happening on the ground. Was that your intention?
Yes. Oh, yes. I mean, although I've got all my empathy and sympathy with employees, unless I knew what was going on, I wasn't prepared just simply to take the views of people at a hugely elevated level of any of the businesses who would give me their line, and it may well have been the right line, but I also wanted to know on the ground what were people feeling, what were they facing, and what was their knowledge, how much information they were given to ensure that their members had a sense of what was going on and have a chance of putting a view if they thought there was a view needed to be put.
Can we look at Bayes 00000355, please? This is again another ministerial submission, this time from David Sibic, 28th of May. Can we look at the third paragraph there? It's your D62, but again, I don't think, I'm just going to read to you a few sentences. It says the second issue is to ensure that the remaining development phases of Horizon, including large-scale live trials, are completed without further slippage, and most crucially, that the rollout of the system following acceptance to all offices within the network is accomplished in a smooth and timely fashion. The CWU and NFSP members will be in the front line of the action during these phases, and both organisations have much to contribute to the successful completion of these phases. Does that make the same point? So that was your vision for the group, would be that the CWU and NFSP being on the front line would be an important component of that group.
Yes, as was the National, although it's not mentioned in that paragraph, that would include the National Federation, most assuredly.
To make the point once more, let's look at NFSP 60/64. This is a letter from you to Colin Baker at the National Federation of Sub-Postmasters, the 7th of June 1999. And this is talking about the Horizon Working Group and its aims and objectives. And it's the final paragraph on that page that I'd very briefly like to take you to. it outlines, we talked about the three areas. This is talking about the second area. It says the second area covers the remaining development phases of Horizon, including large-scale live trials, system acceptance and rollout of the system smoothly and in a timely fashion to all offices within the network, following the migration from paper-based methods of benefit payments to ACT-based payments accessible at post offices. I believe that the working group could provide a valuable forum for bringing pressure to bear where needed and for seeking solutions to any problems that may arise. That's the same point being made in a letter there to Colin Baker of the NFSP.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You actually launched the working group at a CWU conference. We can see that at Bayes 0000357.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes, also at the same time, I informed them of the purchase of the German Postal Service. I don't mean the National Post Office. It was a group of distributors in Germany of parcels, etc. And having spoken to the chief executive, John Roberts, at the time, it was a potentially important marketplace which they would need to get into, given that the German, French, Dutch, and other parcel services and post offices were becoming active in the British market.
Thank you. So we're here now in May of 1999. Your evidence so far has been that there wasn't a significant government study, or not aware of a technical study between the Montague report and the summer of 1999, and also that government civil servants weren't that knowledgeable about technical matters. How important did you see at this time these meetings to be the forum to raise technical issues with Horizon?
I thought it was critical, and it was incumbent on me, and then subsequently I didn't last this chair very long. I was out the door and onto the Cabinet Office, but I felt it was a duty of care towards people that this wasn't just a one-line press release. We've got this group. I wanted to be a working body recognised by all concerned, treated with respect, and one that views would be listened to and taken into account in an effective way.
Can we look at NFSP and then 50203? This is the note of the first meeting on the 22nd of June. Could we go over the page, please? So this is the first meeting, 22nd of June. You're there present along with the Union Association and NFSP. Could we go over the page, please, to page 3? And there are 2 paragraphs that I'd just like you to give a little bit more detail about. In this top paragraph, it says, there was a need to establish exactly what POCL was buying. ICL had not allowed access to POCL, so they could determine this and have insisted that it is not a contractual issue. They have however, indicated that they are willing to talk informally. POCL consider the issue to be too important to the future commercial prospects of the project to rest on a purely informal and unenforceable indication. I apologise for just quickly taking you to one paragraph, but are you able to assist us with that at all?
Well, that's a classic, if you don't mind me saying, reason why we established the group. Because unless we had the group, it is absolutely certain that the key people on the front line would have no knowledge of this difficulty, none whatsoever. And therefore, this was a matter for the group to consider, and from that, what actions or recommendations they wanted to make, or whether they just wanted to say, well, you as ministers get on with this, sort this out and come back to us with what you're proposing.
And I'm now going to read to you paragraph 6, and it's one that you may have already seen. It says, Mr. McCartney said that the rollout issue was crucial. He was emphatically not prepared to accept getting away from the commitment to 2001. Slippage would make the wider discussions on government usage of the network impossible. If there were problems with software, training, etc., then these should have been flagged up earlier and must now be resolved in a way that enabled the 2001 timetable to be recovered. It seems to be your position expressed there that software issues would have to wait. Do you agree with that?
Not wait. I was wanting what I read here is that I'm saying that these should have been dealt with earlier, and we've got to deal with them now. But it's going to be dealt with because they've not been dealt with early in a tight time scale and a commitment that was previously given. And so the pressure was on me as a minister and the ministerial team and their technical people. It was to ensure that those issues were resolved and resolved effectively and hopefully maintain the commitment to 2001, which wouldn't be easy to do given the number of years the commitment, previous commitments were out of date. And so that's what that means. It's not dealing with not dealing with issues that need deal with. It's complaining about the slippage should never have happened in the way it did, and when it did happen, it should have been dealt with. This goes back again to the senior reporting officer role, etc.
It may be suggested that the impression that you are giving at that meeting is that speed was now more important than technical concerns. What would you say about that? No,
I'm simply telling them and reminding them what the commitment was, and that the slippage was now causing these difficulties. But that doesn't suggest, from me, that I would have, let's forget it, let it drop off the end of the truck. Far from it. I wanted this to be resolved, but it was important that the key people on the front line there knew what was going on and what the consequences could be. And the consequences could be, and I can't remember, it did happen, was that the 2001 commitment would be passed.
You've said that you were dependent on the CWU and NFSP raising concerns at this stage about the technical issues. Do you think that the atmosphere was such that they were concerned that they shouldn't raise concerns at that stage because it would delay rollout? You're suggesting that that's what the union's positions were. Is that what you're saying to me? Well, if they were to suggest that it wasn't really an atmosphere in which they could raise technical issues because of those kinds of time pressures that you've mentioned at paragraph 6 there, would they be right in that or not? No, but I can understand that that's why they're all on there. Their interests is slightly different from sub-postmasters, although they were committed to making sure the sub-postmasters were dealt with very well. And it may well be, remembering they were already in discussions with government senior ministers, including Secretary of State, regarding the drafting of the white paper. And it may well be them tactically wanted to ensure that in the white paper, if required, there would be some recognition of issues relating to this. And that may well have been what the case was, that they wanted to, as well as making comment here, they wanted to keep open their door that they have directly to the Secretary of State and others involved in the drafting of the white paper. Is it your evidence that the atmosphere was such during those meetings that the unions and NFSP were fully able to raise technical concerns should they have had them.
Yes, yeah, there absolutely no doubt. That's what the meetings were there for, to hear from them.
Can we look at NFSP 50471, please? This is a report of the NFSP National Executive Council. It's a document that we've seen several times in this inquiry. And can we look at page 27? Page 27 at the bottom contains a summary of the same meeting, so the 22nd of June meeting. And if we go over the page, it says, a little bit further down, please, it records as having been discussed at that first meeting. The subject of systems faults was raised, and the NFSP were given assurances that there would be software improvements to cure the present difficulties. The Federation were asked for more precise numbers of sub-postmasters who were experiencing difficulties, as this information would assist them to provide us with the help we require. That reference to the subject of system faults being raised, that is contained in the NFSP's note of the Working Party meeting of the 22nd of June, but it doesn't appear in the official minutes or note of the Working Party meeting. Is it something you remember being raised by the NFSP?
Oh yes, I mean that was clearly raised, and it was raised alongside, because I was acutely aware on the statement I'd given to call the meeting about the importance of the trials and the basis for them and the range of them. So yes, I remember that. Why it's not in the minutes, I don't know. It's too far away. It wouldn't be my part trying to stop it. The minutes are done by the civil servants, and yes, we get them and we've got to approve them. So I must have approved it, but to be honest with you, that should have appeared.
So you do recall the NFSB having raised system faults during that meeting?
Yeah, not just during that meeting. They'd raised them. Yeah, they'd raised them. Mr. Baker had raised them before, if I remember correctly.
Actually, if we could go back to that document again, sorry, but look at page 23. This report goes on to minute the meeting of the NFSP, so that took place after that first working group meeting. And this is, again, something you may have seen during this inquiry. If we look a little bit further down, there's quite a lot of criticism from sub-postmasters about the system that's then available. It says, for example, there was general discussion on the severe difficulties being experienced by sub-postmasters who are already running an automated system. 7 sheets of comments from the North East have been passed to Mr. Dave Miller. Pausing there, do you remember that at all? Did Dave Miller ever mention to you that he had been passed?
Who's Dave Miller?
From the post office.
No, I don't recognise it.
The difficulties and trauma being experienced by some sub-postmasters were giving rise to concerns for their health and emotional well-being. It was felt by some that a tragedy was not far away, if something was not altered soon. The software was considered to be poor quality and not intended to run such a huge network. The system is based on Echo, which was originally written for a network of 700, not 15,500. Perhaps we can go over the page. Similar concerns continue to be expressed, and there's a mention there of the General Secretary assuring the meeting that Mr. David Miller had been informed of the difficulties in no uncertain terms. Sticking with that paragraph, it says, "We cannot continue to have experienced sub-postmasters, mistresses in distress on the telephone, struggling until all hours to balance. These situations must not be permitted to arise." Was that level of concern being raised to the best of your recollection, at the Horizon Working Group meetings?
That specific example, no.
Not that specific example, but perhaps that sub-postmasters were distressed by the new system.
If the report that went to Mr. Miller had actually come to our committee, I would have seen it and would have dealt with it. That was the whole purpose of the committee. I don't recognise Mr. Miller. I apologise to him if he's ever met me, but I just don't remember him or getting any information from him. And I'm sure if he had sent me information, it would appear in the documents.
So to the best of your recollection of those Horizon Working Group meetings, was that kind of information, certainly the emotion that we've seen that's raised at that meeting, or the detail of problems that were being raised at that meeting, were those kinds of things being raised at the Horizon Working Group or not?
As a constituency MP in an area where post office closures had been going on apace, and also as postmasters and mistresses were coming up for retirement, the difficulties that was then apparent in securing new ownership. And so I was not unaware of the emotional distress and concern and worry that people had, and understandably so, given the potential changes that were to take place and the length of time it had been taking. We're talking years here that they've been having to speculate what was going to happen to their business themselves and the technology and how they would use it. I mean, these people have been under pressure for such a significant time, and that's one of the reasons that we wanted to ensure that we got a settlement and got it in an effective way, or this would just continue into the future. So, and that would be absolutely wrong.
But we're now talking about a position where certain sub-postmasters do have the system and are raising concerns about the software, etc.
Yes.
Mr. Baker's evidence this morning was that he didn't think that the working group was the forum to raise those kinds of technical issues. Is your evidence that those kinds of technical issues was in fact raised at the working group or not?
Well, it's been very helpful. I'm not criticising him, far from it. He worked with me over a significant period, and so we knew each other pretty well. I would say that his reasoning was a quite clear one, that he had access to the people who were responsible for dealing with these issues, and so he went direct to them. The issue is, if we'd known about it, I could do something effectively, because I don't know what the outcome was with Mr. Miller, but certainly if we'd known as a committee, because you'll see my letter was said about raising issues on the front line. It was about the front line and what was happening to it that was critical and important to me.
And just so we're absolutely clear, because I appreciate we've been going for some time this afternoon, were those kinds of issues in fact raised at the working group, or do you think that they were raised separately with Mr. Miller in the post office?
Well, it would seem that's the case with Mr. Miller in the post office.
But you've said also that you were, in any event, aware of those kinds of issues as a constituency MP.
Yes, and that's why I had the empathy I did to get the matter resolved, and also to ensure that frontline voices were heard.
When you say to get the matter resolved, how was it resolved?
Apologies, I don't mean that individual case.
No, not at all. But so I just want to make sure that there's absolutely no confusion. We're talking now the summer of 1999, and you've said that there were concerns raised at a constituency level. What period was that?
Well, it was over quite a considerable period. following the miners' strike in areas like my own, there was significant closures of.
So your concern was closures, but what about technical problems with Horizon?
No, I can honestly say I had no technical problems raised with me. But what I had and noticed and had raised with me was people's anxiety, concern, lack of information, if you want, all sorts of things. And that takes its toll on people. Their mental health suffers from that. And the decision making about the next stage in their life is acutely upended. And that's why these signs are as important as some of the technical difficulties that arose.
So the concerns that were being raised to you at the Horizon Working Group concerned concerns about the post office network generally, rather than technical issues with Horizon software, for example, the kinds of things that we saw in those NFSP minutes.
Yes, I think that would be fair to say. I apologise if I forgot and there was issues raised by Mr. Baker.
Not at all. Well, in fact, his evidence was to the contrary, that he didn't see the Horizon Working Group as the forum to raise those kinds of technical issues.
Yeah. Okay.
Was that the impression that you had at the time?
No, not an impression. I mean, it was clear from what I've said verbally, what I've written and calling the group together, was I wanted to know what the front line was experiencing, and including, of course, what they thought of the system that was going to be put in, or was being put in. And so that was a major point of why I wanted it to work.
I'm going to look very briefly at the next minutes of the 7th of July. That's NFSP.
Mr. Blake, before you do that, I think I should let everybody know that I cannot sit beyond 4:30 tonight. So I hadn't for a minute thought that these two witnesses would take us right to the end of the day, so to speak.
I know, so I apologise for that.
I mean, since Sir Ian is remote, it's not as critical that, in the sense he might be able to come back much more easily rather than try and cram everything into 5 or 6 minutes.
Absolutely. So Ian, are you able to attend tomorrow morning?
Yeah, I'll just check if I can my diary. It sounds like I've got a full-time job. No, it just seems that way sometimes, volunteering. I think I'll just double check. I may have to cancel a optician.
We won't be longer than, certainly not more than an hour tomorrow morning.
Okay, let's see.
And it doesn't have to be tomorrow morning, does it, Mr. Blake, in the sense that Sir Ian could be fitted in, so to speak, at some suitable moment.
Yes.
Right. Yeah, well, tomorrow's Friday.
Tomorrow's
No,
Thursday.
Thursday, sorry. No, other than having a Scottish Labour Party dinner, which I'm not going to, we're free.
So could you come back at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, Sir Ian?
Yes, I can.
Well, then I propose to call a halt at this point, Mr. Blake. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I wonder, can I just take, it may be that we need to start slightly earlier tomorrow, only because we have, I think it's Alan Milburn tomorrow, who may have other commitments.
Right.
Would it be a problem for everybody if we started at 9:30 tomorrow?
Well, for Sir Ian and I, it's probably not a problem at all. But as for the people in the hall, they better say no.
And everybody, it seems to be in agreement that 9:30 is absolutely fine tomorrow.
Right, then we'll break now and we'll start again at 9:30 tomorrow so as to ensure that everybody who's due to give evidence tomorrow has sufficient time to do it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Right, thank you.